Welcome to day 9 of my Valentine series. Today we'll be painting a spicy little lip-biting watercolor. We'll start out with a pretty simple outline. I'll draw out the top lip and I'll make the right side of it a little bit taller. These lips are going to be extremely exaggerated, very juicy, very plump, almost graphic in its look. So when I'm stenciling out the bottom of the top lip, I'm making sure that it's still very voluminous and giving ample room so that the bottom lip is just as big. I'm putting some peaks just so I can show the gum line of the teeth, and that's going to be covered with shadow anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. I just don't want the top lip to be too rigid. And then I'll go in with the teeth. This part is a little bit tricky only because you're not seeing the end result, so it's looking a little snaggletooth. But the first tooth should be pretty hidden, and then the next two teeth are the two front teeth. So you make those a little bit bigger, and then just try to put in very small ones, knowing that most of it's going to be covered by the bottom lip. And it's okay to erase a little bit if you see a line is a little too straight or you feel like the dimensions are off a little bit. This is the time where it's okay to erase and go back in, especially before you've laid down any paint. Once you're happy with your outline, you can go ahead and erase your harsh pencil lines. And then I used a Payne's Gray, heavily diluted, to start on the teeth. The smaller the tooth, the more gray I'm going to make it, because I feel like that means most of the tooth is covered and there'll be more of a heavy shadow. So that first tooth is pretty much all gray, and then the next two teeth just have more gray at the very top and in between. I'm doing the same for all the other teeth, doing a light outline, and then I'll blend it out with a damp brush. You'll be putting a few different layers of this gray wash. So this is just the first one. There'll be 2 or 3 more. So this is just to get a feeling of the space and get that first shadow down. It can look a little scary here because the teeth seem completely gray, but that will change once you put the other colors down. Just make sure to blend out your harsh lines with a damp brush and keep the bottoms of the teeth relatively clear of paint. And then completely dry it before working on the lips. So for the lips, I'm mixing the Pyrrole Scarlet with just a touch of Quinacridone Rose that's on my palette. Pyrrole Scarlet can turn a tad orange when it's heavily diluted, and I didn't want the underlayer for the lips to be an orange tint. I'd rather it be a pink tint, so I mixed it with the Quinacridone Rose and just doing a light wash here all over. I'm using wet on wet technique to continue mixing a little more of that Quinacridone Rose with a little more of the Pyrrole Scarlet, and I'm just going in with my second layer. This is definitely the ugly phase of the painting. The teeth look snaggletooth, the lips look oddly shaped. It doesn't really seem like this was the end goal, but you just have to trust the process here. We're trying to add a little bit of a highlight at the top lip, so we'll try to lift off some color where we can, and we will skip it with this next layer of our red. Because the outside of the lips would be a little darker and the highlight is in the middle, we will outline it with this layer and then blend it out with a damp brush. This is the first layer after the base wash, so it's okay to be heavy-handed and blend it out. Most of this will be covered. You're just creating a little bit of depth for what's to come. Once you finish that bottom lip, we'll go back into the top lip using a little bit more Pyrrole Scarlet this time, and we're deepening that red using that wet on wet technique. The inside of the mouth will be darker than the lips, so we'll be completely coloring all of this part in with our dark Pyrrole Scarlet. And once again, we're going back in with that Pyrrole Scarlet, this time having a little bit thicker of a line around the outline. And this glazing effect is just going to deepen the shadow and also create more depth and roundness in the lips. So to bring out some more of that undertone, we're going to mix some quinacridone rose back in with our Pyrrole Scarlet, and then this will be our next layer, adding a little bit more contrast and complexity to the outline, and that will also darken it. It's important to continue using that damp brush to blend out each of these layers, and it also helps for the colors to bleed in towards the middle. With each new layer, we're getting closer and closer to the inside of the lip, and so now we can start a little bit of this veining technique. So think of it like flowers and the veining technique of a leaf, and just extend your darker color inward and then blend it out with a damp brush. The veining also helps to create more of a roundness in the lips, especially when you curve your lines in the veining. Once you're done with that, completely dry it before moving on to the next layer. So we'll be using a complementary color mix here. So take your Pyrrole Scarlet and a little bit of Sap Green, and that will mix a darker shade that will be used on the outline, and again, completely blend it out. I love using complementary colors as shadow colors, especially in portions that don't seem so dark. I feel like it looks more natural than if I were to just add black to my Pyrrole Scarlet. With each of these new layers, we will continue the veining, and that way it's not just one layer of veining, it will be multiple layers and it won't look so rigid, especially with us blending it out with a damp brush. This is where you can define a little bit more on the top lip. I like creating another peak in the middle, and that way it doesn't seem so flat. The veining technique is so important to adding dimension to the lips, So take your time here and don't worry about following the exact lines from the previous layer. Once you're happy with it, you can go ahead and completely dry it before moving on to an even darker shadow shade. So we'll mix more of the complementary color, the sap green with the pyrrole scarlet, and we'll do a deep outline, but we won't mix it too far inside. We'll just kind of blend out the harsh edges, but we'll keep that more of like a defining shadow. We can use this darker color to accentuate certain parts of the lips, like the peak in the middle, on the corners, and the inside of the lips towards the teeth. This darker color can help accentuate the roundness of the lips. So adding just a few touches here and there while following the veining, it will actually make more of a rounded look. The damp brush is your friend, and not only will it help to blend out the harsh edges, but it will also help create veins on its own. We'll be using the same color for another layer inside of the mouth and just darken all of that space in between the teeth. So we're just touching up certain areas that seem like it could be a little bit darker before we add on our darkest color. So this time we'll be taking our pyrrole scarlet and we'll add some raw umber and just put a dot of Payne's gray. This will make this deep maroon color, and we'll be using that for outlining the lips and the inside of the mouth. We'll be using a very thin brush, and we'll just do a quick outline and make sure to blend it out with a damp brush. We can add just a few little dots and squiggly marks at the top lip, and these kind of look like shadows cast by the texture of the lip. And while we'll use a damp brush to blend it, we'll still try to keep that same original shape. You can use this darkest color to create a little bit more veining at the corners of the mouth. And then you can dilute it a little bit and then start working in the outline of the lip by the teeth and just kind of work your way in towards the middle, adding a few more details wherever you feel like it needs a little bit of something. You don't want it to look too flat. So adding a little bit of darker colors and then blending it out, especially in the outline, is a great way to make it look more rounded. Now that we put down the red, we can see the contrast with the gray, and we can go back in with another layer of that gray mixture and then add a little bit more depth in that shadow. There should be 2 or 3 layers on the front teeth, so we'll keep on going in with our gray mixture, blending it out with a damp brush. And then once we're completely happy with that, we will completely dry it before adding our highlight. I'm using a bleed proof white and I'm going quite thin with my highlight at the top lip. I know that once I blend it, it'll make it a little bit bigger. So I'm making that first line quite thin, making squiggly little lines and trying to mimic the veining. And then I'll also touch up some of the teeth just to add a little bit of highlight. And then for the bottom lip, I'll do the same thing with the squiggly lines. This time I'll make it a little bit thicker and I want to drag out the highlight here. So when I blend it out, I'll make it much whiter. And once you are happy with your highlight and you completely dry it, then you're done. So this is what it looks like in natural light. I hope you enjoyed painting with me, and I'll see you in the next video.